Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dimes and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 66 event, which takes place in Pasay, Philippines. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 4 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, we didn't have any premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 65, and our free bet lost a heartbreaker of 1 unit with a parlay that included Kalen Curran and Beck Rawlings. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 66 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1 this Saturday morning. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card is a flyweight contest between Nolan Tickman, who is 4-2, and Yao Zakui, who is 1-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Tickman minus 210, the comeback on Zakui, plus 160, and right now, over at 5dimes.eu, it is Tickman minus 230, the comeback on Zakui is plus 190. So a little bit more action coming in on Tickman. Nothing significant, though. And by the way, all lines are our sponsor, 5dimes.eu, so make sure, as always, you check those guys out. But back to this fight real quick. This should be a competitive fight. I mean, both guys definitely have some skill, better than the records indicate, really. But both of them are also very flawed. I mean, starting off with Tickman first, his fight against Sains was, at first he looked great. The first part of that first round, I should say, he looked great. But then cardio started coming into play. He started slowing down, didn't do much. Less activity, the worse it got for him, and he lost kind of, a lopsided decision there because round 2 and round 3 were definitely Sains' rounds. So, that's unfortunate for Tickman because I think the guy has a lot of talent. He trains at a good camp. I know the circumstances for that fight were a little bit different. This time he's going to get a full camp. He's going to be ready to go in this spot. But still, if you look back even in his fights before he made his UFC debut, you could see some cardio issues at hand with Tickman. So I think that's a big concern for Tickman. But as far as talent go, the guy has some serious knockout power on the feet. He has some skill. He's got some very solid wrestling to go along with it. He's pretty much well-rounded, no doubt about it. The guy is good enough to definitely win some fights in the flyweight division. Now, that being said, you could look at his opponent in Zakui and you could say a lot of the same things for him. I think he's better also than his record indicates. Of course, he's a former Tough China semifinalist, lost by unanimous decision in the semis there. And also in his official UFC debut, lost to Wei in a very competitive decision that could have really gone his way. But again, another spot where his cardio, he started slowing down a little bit. And I think if he would have had just a little bit more, he could have possibly, pulled that fight off. It was pretty close against Wei. So Zakui is a very talented fighter, again, better than his record indicates. He's well-rounded. I think he's got a little bit of power and ability on the feet. He's got some decent wrestling to go along with it, but it's just nothing great from him either. I think if you compare the two, Tickman is the better fighter, but Zakui might be the aggressor here. So that's what's going to make this fight a little bit interesting, especially as the fight goes forward. It is Tickman's fight to win or lose, though, so it's hard to pick against him in this spot. And I expect Tickman to show up a little bit better than he did here. But it is going to be a close matchup with a slight lean towards Tickman for me. I think he is the better fighter, and he should come through more times than not.
Yeah, to me, it does feel like they're making this fight so that a solid Filipino fighter can come in there and get a win and get the crowd all hyped up for their debut in the Philippines in the opening bout of the night. But it's not going to be an easy task for Nolan Tickman. I mean, Tickman does have talent, trains at King's MMA, so you know that he's getting some top-notch training and coaching from Rafael Cordero and all the guys over there, but it might not be enough. The main thing here is Nolan Tickman has good power, he is athletic and quick, and he has a solid ground game and the ability to get up if taken down easily. The problem is he doesn't handle pressure well. He's the type of guy that needs a little bit of space, and a guy like Frankie Sains just stayed right in his face and pressured him and took him down at will, and it eventually just overwhelmed him. Now, I'm not saying that Yao Zakui is going to be able to do that, but he is that type of fighter. Zakui really likes to move forward. He is a very aggressive striker, tries to throw big, powerful blows on the feet, and then on the ground when he does get top position, he definitely drops some big punishment. So Tickman cannot afford to get on his back, and he cannot afford to just be moving backwards and constantly defending those big strikes on the feet. So he's going to have to be careful. Zakui, I actually thought, clearly won his UFC debut against Royston Wei. He was landing big bombs on him, and yeah, he got taken down a few times, but he reversed it, and he should have won that fight. I thought it was some pretty bad judging overall. So both guys are dropping down to the flyweight division for the first time in the UFC at least, and I do expect Tickman to be the better fighter, the more well-coached fighter, but Zakui is a bit of a live dog if he's able to keep the pressure up, because again, Tickman just does not handle that well. That being said, the caliber of opponents these guys faced in their UFC debuts are on a whole different level. I mean, Frankie Sains is a top 15 fighter on the UFC roster right now after he beat Urijah, and Royston Wei's never going to be a top 15 in his dreams. So I do think that maybe we're discounting Tickman a little bit just based on how bad he looked against a pretty solid opponent. And I do think that he turns it around here and gets the win. So my pick is Nolan Tickman. Now, sticking with the flyweight division, we have Roldan Sangcha-An, who is 4-1, taking on John Delos Reyes, who is 7-4. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Delos Reyes minus 190, the comeback on Sangcha-An plus 150, and right now the line is minus 185 plus 160. So line margins tighten up a little bit, not a tremendous amount of action coming in. I think there's a lot of people that want to kind of stay away from this fight, and I understand it. Getting into the matchup, Reyes is definitely a very talented fighter. He's got a ton of power on the feet. He's very aggressive, looks for the kill, has a tremendous amount of knockout capabilities for sure. He also has a little bit of a sub game to go along with it. So he is pretty well rounded, not a bad wrestling game, either. But his problem is defensively, you can catch the guy, obviously knock him out. He got knocked down in his last fight against Horiguchi. Got to give him a little bit of leeway there because Horiguchi's one of the guys that is towards the top of the 125 division. So that's understandable a little bit. But he did get submitted again by armbar to Dustin Kimura in his UFC debut. So he does have those flaws on the ground where he can get caught, even though offensively he's dangerous as well. So he needs to avoid anything, getting himself in a bad spot or bad situation against Sangcha-An. And I think he should be okay in this spot, because this is definitely a winnable fight for Reyes, but Sangcha-An is a pretty solid fighter, and again, it's slightly underrated. He hung in there with Vasulik. What cost him in that fight was Vasulik's top control, and basically his wrestling, controlling the tempo of the fight and grinding him out a little bit here. But I think Sangcha-An has a little bit of ability on the feet, no doubt about it. He's got a little bit underrated knockout power. He can be aggressive at times for sure, and his sub game's not that bad either. So he's another one of these guys that are well rounded, but I don't think he's going to be able to take the physicality of Reyes here in this spot. I think Reyes, if he can maintain it in his aggression, I think he can come away with a decision here. I think he is the better overall wrestler, the better overall fighter at times. It's just, again, his defense is not the greatest, and I think that could cost him if he's not careful. But overall, if you compare to the two, they do match up similar, but I think Reyes is just slightly ahead in all categories, and he's got more potential, I think, at 125 as well. He's not going to be an easy out. He's had a couple tough fights, coming into the UFC thus far, but I think this is a winnable fight for him, and I think he's going to come away with a win. So hard to trust these guys, but a slight lean towards Reyes, because I do think he's the better fighter here.
You look at these guys, and Reyes definitely is by far the more experienced fighter, and I do think that physically, Reyes should be a little bit bigger, stronger too. So I do think that Sangcha-An is a little bit better than people are expecting. I mean, in his last fight against Philippe, he had some good moments. He showed that he has at least a pretty good basic understanding of the ground. His striking isn't half bad. My problem is he's a little too focused on kicks on the feet. His punching isn't that dangerous, and I think De Los Reyes is much more dangerous in terms of his punching, and that is the more consistent striking ability. So De Los Reyes is going to be able to get inside, land some good shots, and I would not be surprised to see De Los Reyes get this fight to the ground and start landing some ground and pound. So Sangcha-An, while he actually is pretty talented, I see him being on the defensive here a lot in this fight. And one thing that I did notice in that fight against Philippe, and Philippe is not a very impressive striker, but Philippe was able to connect with the straight right and the right hook pretty consistently. And De Los Reyes has a lot more power behind those strikes. And I think that Sangcha-An just drops his left hand for some reason and is going to be exposed to a heavy right hook. And he could get put out here in this fight if he sits there and just drops that left hand and eats one. So I think that De Los Reyes definitely is a dangerous fighter here, and people might be underestimating him just because he got finished so quickly in both of his UFC fights so far. But I think the guy does have some talent. I mean, that Kimura fight, he almost finished Kimura, had him in big trouble, and ended up getting submitted, and then second fight hit the flyweight debut against Horiguchi. I mean, there's just no chance he had there. So I think this is a much more winnable fight for De Los Reyes, and I think he comes away with it. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have Ning Guangyou, who is 5-2-1, taking on Royston Wei, who is 4-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shipped at things so far?
I opened Wei minus 150, the comeback on Guangyou, plus 110, and right now looking over the line of 5 dimes, it's Wei minus 115, minus 105 for Guangyou, so a little bit more support coming in on the underdog, but still staying basically a pick'em with a slight lean towards Wei. I do understand the early action on the dog. Guangyou is actually the tough China featherweight winner. So it is what it is. I know a lot of people don't respect a lot of the tough China guys as of yet, but they are, again, as I mentioned earlier, all a little bit better than the record indicates. And I think Guangyou has some potential, and he has some talent for sure. He's a well-rounded, powerful fighter. He's a southpaw. He's got that going for him as well. He's fast and aggressive on the feet. He's got really good timing with his knee attack as well. Solid wrestling and groundwork. And his takedown defense and his scrambling ability is actually pretty good. It's not too bad at all. So he's got all those going for him, and I think that a lot of that's an advantage over Wei. I think Wei's more of a one-trick pony, to be honest with you. I mean, he's fortunate, as we mentioned, that he got the decision in his last fight, a split decision win. I know that the UFC's been behind Wei a little bit, trying to promote him, trying to, I guess, give him some winnable fights, and Wei's grappling ability is what came through for him. Even in his last fight that was questionable, I still think that that's what kind of got him the nod of the judges' cards that did score it that way for him. So that one-trick pony might not work here against Guangyou, honestly. I think that Guangyou is the more talented fighter of the two. I think on the feet, he's actually going to torch Wei. He's got a little bit more power, more finishing capabilities. And what I'm impressed with is when Wei does get top control, because I'm sure he will at some point in this fight, I think that Guangyou actually has the ability to scramble out of it and maintain top position to get back to his feet. And then once he does get back to his feet, I think he is going to have a significant advantage. So it is going to be, I'm sure, a very close competitive fight, but I'm going to lean with Guangyou as well. I think that he's the better of the two fighters, and I think more times than not, he probably will come away with the win here. Now, the only flaw in Guangyou is I think he needs some work on that cardio. He does tend to slow down a little bit and get inactive at times, and he can't have that against Wei, especially if it is going to be a close decision. So that could be one of his flaws there. But overall, like I said, if you just compare the two, I think Guangyou is a more talented fighter, and I think he's going to probably win this fight.
Royston Wei has been one of the least impressive guys to make it to 2-0 in the UFC that I've ever seen. I think the guy he beat in his UFC debut never fought again in the UFC, and then Zakui, even though he's 1-2 overall in his mixed martial arts career, I thought he beat Royston Wei despite being an undersized flyweight debuting as a bantamweight. Wei just is not impressive whatsoever. He has almost zero striking ability. He has very little that he can do anywhere except on the ground in top position. And I don't know, he's going to need to do that against Guangyou. I mean, Guangyou isn't the greatest fighter either, but I thought he did really well on The Ultimate Fighter. He scored some pretty impressive knockouts, and then he was able to pretty much dominate his opponent on the finale, which ended up being held at the Bisping versus Kung Lee fight instead of the Tough China finale due to an injury to his opponent. Now, Royston Wei absolutely 100% needs to get takedowns and stay in top position if he wants to win rounds and win this fight, and or get a submission. Because Guangyou is going to beat him up on the feet. He is by far the better striker. Like, hands down, it's not even close. Guangyou will be landing some heavy shots. He has a really strong, powerful left hook and right hook, and I definitely think he could put Royston Wei out. In Royston Wei's last fight, I mean, his nose got bent completely in three opposite directions. It was ridiculous, and I think Guangyou hits even harder than Zhang, and he could definitely knock Royston Wei out if he connects with something solid. Now, on the ground, Guangyou actually has pursued the takedown in some of his previous fights, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him do it, but I think he should avoid that and just focus on his biggest strength here, and his biggest advantage is the stand-up. Now, on the feet, Guangyou has a tendency to be inactive at times, and now Royston Wei won't be able to take advantage of that with his own striking, but it might leave an opening for Wei to just get inside and try to take this fight to the canvas, because Guangyou isn't the scariest striker despite his power, just because he just sits back, and he's been warned multiple times in fights to to pick up the pace. So that is a concern for me, but overall I do actually think Guangyou is the better fighter. I do think that Guangyou could pull this one out. The ground game shouldn't be so overwhelming for Wei, so I'm going to pick the Tough China winner, Guangyou. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Li Jingliang, who is 9-3, taking on Dhiego Lima, who is 10-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Lima minus 215, the comeback on Jingliang, plus 165. Right now, Lima is minus 190. The comeback's still the same, though, plus 165. So line margins tighten up a little bit. And I'll tell you what, for the popularity of the Lima brothers, I know Douglas is obviously the more popular of the two. That tells you something, that the line is actually this close, because, I mean, Lima definitely has some talent. It's just unfortunate that he's been really getting beat in devastating fashion when he does get beat. So he has some flaws. I mean, you got to give him a little bit of leeway, I guess, because in his last fight against Tim Means, I mean, Means is a beast, obviously very aggressive, talented striker, and he caught Lima early in that fight and just put him out there. But against Eddie Gordon, the same situation there, though. He got caught early in that fight, knocked out. So that doesn't sit very well, I think, with most people here. So I think that's why they're tentative not to come in on Lima. And Jingliang, on the other hand, he's not too bad, actually. I mean, I think the guy's pretty impressive overall. He's one of these China top team products, and has a pretty well-rounded game as a whole. His last fight with Talib was actually pretty competitive, and we've seen what Talib is able to do. He's been on a little roll outside of the UFC Ultimate Fighter, I should say, but since Talib's been into the actual UFC and making some waves here and getting some solid W's. So that was a very competitive fight. So Jingliang has some ability. Again, on the feet, he's pretty well-rounded, has a little bit of power. Fortunately for Lima, he doesn't have the knockout power that the last two guys that were able to knock him out has, but still, with Lima's chin being so suspect, you never know. I wouldn't put it past Lima getting knocked out again, but that's probably not the way this is going to go. I think Jingliang is going to try to look to grind out Lima here a little bit against the cage and just kind of control the tempo of the fight. Again, he's pretty powerful, so I wouldn't be shocked if he does get top position on Lima, but he's got to be cautious, though, because Lima's jiu-jitsu is pretty solid. No doubt about it. I think he's got that going for him. And Lima, even on the feet offensively, he's actually pretty talented as well. And he also trains at a pretty solid camp, ATT in Atlanta. So a lot of good things about Lima, but again, it's just that that chin, that defense has gotten beat recently. And I think even if this fight does hit the scorecards, I think that it's going to be a very competitive fight. I think Jingliang is going to be able to hang in there and make this fight at least interesting. I do give the overall skill set though slightly towards Lima. I think that Lima is going to be a little bit longer here, and he doesn't have that threat of knockout like I just mentioned compared to some of the other fighters he's faced. So he should be able to get the job done here. He should be able to win this fight. He might even be able to sub Jingliang along the way. If that's the case. If not, again, it'll be a competitive decision, but I think Lima could actually win the decision here as well. So I think really it's Lima's fight to win or lose. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he does lose this fight. So it's not a confident pick by any means, but I do think that Lima is the more talented fighter of the two, and it's hard to kind of pick against him in this spot, to be honest with you. It might be a dog or pass situation as far as betting goes, because I wouldn't necessarily lay that kind of juice on Lima right now, but I do think that he is the more talented fighter, and he's probably going to win this fight.
I do think that Li Jingliang is one of the better fighters out of China. I mean, he didn't even compete on Tough China. They just brought him straight to the UFC, and he did okay in his debut against Machad, and even his last fight, he actually held his own and it went to a split decision. He just found himself on the losing end, but I mean, he made it close. So I do think that Jingliang is a pretty talented welterweight fighter, and the problem here is Jingliang isn't a very good striker, and you need to be a good striker to take out Dhiego Lima, because Lima is really known for having a poor chin. I mean, unfortunately, the guy just, when he gets hit, he gets hurt really badly. I mean, you saw it in his UFC debut, which was the tough finale, when he got knocked out quickly, and then his next fight, he ends up taking down his opponent the whole fight, and then almost gets knocked out again. And then his last fight, Tim Means, he gets blistered, got dropped, and then Tim Means let him up, and then Tim Means finished him after rocking him again. So I do think that Dhiego Lima's chin is a huge liability. I think he's been dropped 4 times in 3 fights so far in his UFC career, and I just don't think that Li Jingliang is the type of fighter that can take advantage of that. He's not the quickest, he's not the most powerful striker, and he's more of a ground fighter, and Dhiego Lima is definitely more of a ground fighter, and Lima is just a better ground fighter in my opinion. Jingliang might be the slightly better wrestler, but Lima's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission skills and transitions on the ground should be light years ahead of Jingliang, at least at this point in his career. Plus, Lima should be a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger, I think. So, I expect Lima should actually be able to hold his own on the feet, just because Jingliang is, a little elementary there still. And I doubt that Lima gets rocked in this fight. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if Jingliang connects with something and dazes Lima, but I don't think that he gets put out. And Lima should be able to control this fight on the ground, and I do think that Lima either gets a submission or wins a decision here. So my pick is Dhiego Lima. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Zhang Lipeng, who is 9-8-1, taking on Kajan Johnson, who is 19-12-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Johnson -140, the comeback on Lipeng, even money, and right now it is Johnson -135. The comeback on Lipeng is +115, so line margins tighten up a little bit. Not any significant action coming in on this fight either. So another one that I think it's a kind of a head scratcher, because if you compare talent for talent, there's no doubt about it. Even though Lipeng is the Ultimate Fighter winner, and he's actually shown some pretty solid improvement along the way since he's made his official UFC debut as well. I still think that Johnson, I mean, as far as ability goes and pure MMA skill, Johnson is very talented. I mean, the guy has some pretty good striking on the feet offensively. He's got some pretty good submissions to go along with it. The guy can control the tempo of the fight in most cases as well. Here's another case. We were just talking about Lima. Johnson's chin is the biggest issue, I think, in most cases. So that is always a scary thing, and that could happen again in this fight. I mean, it's another situation though where Lipeng doesn't really have a tremendous amount of knockout power, but the guy's constantly improving. He's going to be the younger fighter as well. So if he does catch that Johnson chin, which has been just busted up big time in several fights, because Johnson's been around the sport for a long time. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking to see Lipeng, get a finish here as well. But if he doesn't, I think it's going to be a competitive decision. I think Johnson is the actual better overall fighter as far as submission skill goes. I think he actually has more finishing capabilities on the feet as well. And if it hits the scorecards, we're probably going to see a competitive decision, but you got to give the slight edge to Johnson as well, especially if he stays off his back, which I think he will be able to in this spot. Johnson's wrestling is a little bit underrated. His ground game overall is a little bit underrated. And he's just a very, very talented fighter, training out of a good camp in TriStar as well. So this is a very difficult matchup for Lipeng, but again, the guy has improved his overall skill set and he keeps on getting better and better. He's putting in the work. And it really shows. Even a guy like Chris Wade, that tells you a lot of things. I mean, if you look back, Lipeng's been subbed, I believe, 5 times throughout his career, and Wade is a very good submission fighter, and he wasn't able to sub Lipeng. So that says a lot, and that's credit to Lipeng's work that he's put in, really, more than anything else. So I'm expecting a somewhat competitive type of fight, but really it should be Johnson's fight to win or lose. Now, the line is so close because, again, it's one of those spots where it's hard to trust Johnson. I mean, he's been busted up so much, especially recently, that it's one of those situations that you never know. It's hard to really lay a big price on a fighter like that. So I think that's why you're seeing the line that's competitive. And overall, this fight should be competitive. But really, I'm slightly leaning towards Johnson. I think he is the more skilled fighter in another spot where he really should win more times than not.
Johnson is definitely the more experienced, more skilled fighter than Lipeng, but the one thing that does concern me is, just like with the Dhiego Lima fight, is his chin. I mean, the guy on The Ultimate Fighter got brutally knocked out by Chad Laprise, and then in his UFC debut, he was tied 1-1, in my opinion, against Tai Hyun Bing, who we'll be talking about momentarily, and then he got blistered by a right counter and knocked out in the 3rd round. So the guy has been knocked out multiple times in his career. I mean, 12 losses. I mean, that's kind of shocking that he's been given another chance in the UFC. But I think that they felt that this was the type of guy that maybe Zhang Lipeng could go out there and look pretty good against. But I do think that Kajan Johnson is the better ground fighter against a guy like Lipeng. And even though Lipeng is a guy that will pursue the takedown, and he's actually pretty good from top position, I expect Kajan Johnson to win scrambles on the ground, and if he pursues the takedown, it's Johnson that'll get top position. In Lipeng's last fight, he did get completely dominated by Chris Wade in terms of takedowns and top control and some guard passes. And while Johnson isn't quite on Chris Wade level of wrestling, I do think that he should be able to take down Lipeng at will. Now, in terms of the durability question, Johnson definitely does have the bad chin, but Lipeng doesn't have a ton of punching power unless maybe he gets top position with ground and pound. Now, on the feet, Lipeng is a little bit better with kicks. He doesn't really use his punching that much except to close the distance, and I think Johnson could actually keep him at bay with his pretty decent jab that he throws. Johnson, flicks that out there pretty good, and against a guy like Lipeng, I think it could be very effective in the stand-up portion. So I see Johnson winning this fight in the clinch. I see Johnson winning this fight from range with the jab, and I expect Johnson to be winning the scrambles and getting top position on the ground. So I think it's going to be a tough one for Zhang Lipeng, although anything can happen in MMA, and with a guy like Johnson and who does fade a little bit as the fight goes on and doesn't have a good chin, anything could happen. So I expect Johnson to win, though, so my pick is Kajan Johnson. Now, sticking with the lightweight division, we have Taehyung Bang, who is 17-8, taking on John Tuck, who is 8-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Tuck minus 160 to come back on Bang plus 120. Another line that stayed relatively close and margins tightened up just a little bit. Tuck minus 155, Bang plus 135. So not a lot of movement here. I think Bang is getting some decent respect because overall I think that the MMA bettors out there in the community in general do respect Tuck's skill set. So that tells you that Bang is also getting some respect here, no doubt about it, especially coming off that impressive knockout victory. We were just talking about Johnson. Bang was able to get the job done there. I mean, he's the type of fighter that has a killer instinct, has a tremendous amount of knockout power on the feet. And he's got decent takedown defense to go along with all that. So his striking becomes even more relevant, and he was able to get the job done. So that's what you can expect from Bang. He's going to look to basically stand and bang, no pun intended. And, he's pretty successful doing so. So Tuck, on the other hand, though, he is the more well-rounded and the better fighter overall, I do think. He had a pretty close and scrappy battle with Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee definitely deserved to get the nod there in that fight. But that being said, I think Lee is an outstanding prospect, a guy that's going to definitely make some noise at 155. So I think Tuck didn't get really blown out by any means. I mean, he was right there and he was game, and he's usually game with everybody. The problem with Tuck for me is basically maybe a little bit of mental issues and how focused he is on the fight game and how prepared he does come into camp, because he always slows down as the fight goes on. His cardio has been a hindrance in the past as well. And you see a different fighter from round 1 to round 3 in Tuck, and he can't really afford to do that, because I think even though both these guys are going to slow down a little bit, Bang's always going to be dangerous, even in round 3. So Tuck has to be very careful here. But as far as skill set goes, I think Tuck can hang with Bang on the feet a little bit. I think Bang is definitely the more dangerous striker of the two, but Tuck has some skill on the feet as well. And then if he gets the fight to the floor, Tuck is definitely the better submission artist and the better submission fighter, period, and better grappler. So I think that Tuck will have an advantage there, but it's going to be hard to control Bang on the ground. I think it's going to be hard to submit Bang as well, because he will have decent enough defense to probably keep things upright. So we're going to see a competitive fight back and forth. And I think that's why, again, you're seeing the line be so close, because Tuck has the skill set, but Bang has, I think, that the kill factor, the capability of finishing the fight, I think a little bit more so than Tuck, especially in this spot and how they match up. So I've been kind of going back and forth on this fight, honestly, because I could really see Bang maybe getting the finish over Tuck. I know Tuck's a hard guy to stop, but I mean, Bang has that special kind of knockout power that I wouldn't be surprised who he knocks out at 155 if he catches him flush. So, and he does have that killer instinct as well. I'm leaning a little bit more towards Tuck because he is the better overall MMA fighter. So it's hard to kind of pick against them in this spot, because I think if it hits the scorecards, Tuck will be more than competitive. Again, he showed it. That's why I mentioned the fight with Lee earlier, because I think Lee is an outstanding fighter, and he showed that he can compete with some of the best in the division at this stage still too. So I think Tuck might be just a little bit too much for Bang, but Bang's going to be always dangerous, and it is another one of these dog or pass situations. I think from top to bottom, there's a lot of those on this card. So Bang might be the value bet here, but I still think that Tuck is probably the safer pick, because again, he just has a little bit more overall skill in this spot.
Taehyung Bang is going to be in a bit of trouble just due to his activity level. John Tuck should be able to outwork him here. One thing I am concerned about is the fact that Tuck is moving to a new gym. He left MMA Lab and is more on the west coast of California. He did a little bit of work at Alliance and a couple other gyms. So switching to new gyms at this point in his career, or at least right before a fight, could be rough for him. Now, Taehyung Bang, though, is the type of fighter that he actually could switch camps and look good against. Bang is a very powerful striker, but that's about it. He's not going to go out there and win rounds unless he's dropping you. And I don't think he's going to drop John Tuck. John Tuck has lost decisions, but it was when he got outworked, and that's just not the type of opponent that Taehyung Bang is. Bang moves forward, but he's mainly looking to counter, and he will sit there and absorb shots in an attempt to try to land that one perfect counter. And he's not the kind of guy that slips and rips and then lands the big shot. I mean, he will take punches right in the face and then try to land that big right hand or that big left. Most of the time it is the right. So Tuck should be prepared for this, and I expect him to come in here and just completely outwork Taehyung Bang. Bang also does have a bit of a cardio issue, but so does Tuck. They both slow down as the fight goes on. And I just think that overall, the diversity of Tuck's attack and his activity level should help him win a decision here. It's going to be very tough to finish Taehyung Bang. I mean, he went full 3 rounds with Taisimov in his UFC debut and almost went the full 3 rounds against Kajan Johnson despite taking some pretty big damage in that fight. So I think that John Tuck probably just outpaces Bang, and as long as he avoids the big knockout blow, the big counter right hand, then he should be in pretty good shape, and I expect Tuck to win a decision here. So my pick is John Tuck. Now, kicking off the main card, we have a featherweight contest between Mark Eddiva, who is 6-1, and Levan Makashvili, who is also 6-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Makashvili minus 350, the comeback on Eddiva plus 250, and right now it's minus 400 for Makashvili, and the comeback on Eddiva is plus 310. So a little bit more action coming in on Makashvili. I'm sure a lot of that is parlay action as well. This is a good fight because I tell you what, Eddiva is one of those guys that's really underrated. We've all disrespected him in some ways. I mean, because he's been a pretty big underdog, so far in the UFC. He came through, obviously, in his first fight and got the W there when he wasn't supposed to. And he, even in his last fight against, Souza, he looked really good. I mean, a lot of people, he was, again, a big underdog. A lot of people were expecting Souza to just destroy this guy on the feet, and Eddiva was giving it right back to him, and had Souza actually hurt at times as well, wobbled. So I think Eddiva is underrated, especially on the feet. He's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter, but man, he's facing a guy that's making his UFC debut and is possibly one of the best prospects out there, outside of the UFC at 145. I mean, Makashvili is definitely legit. He's more of your grappling-based fighter. He's a former CFFC featherweight champion. Was actually supposed to fight. This tells you something. The UFC had him originally scheduled to fight Nick Lentz at UFC Fight Night 60, I believe, but Lentz ended up pulling out late due to the flu-like symptoms. So, I mean, matching him up with somebody like Lentz, obviously they thought he would at least perform well enough to hang in there with Lentz at times. I know Lentz is kind of a big step up and especially tough debut to make. Eddiva, definitely an easier fight than a guy like Nick Lentz. So Makashvili's got that going for him. But back to his background a little bit. He's got a tremendous wrestling background. He's a former national champion of the country of Georgia, I believe. He's an aggressive fighter, pushes a very high pace. He's got that kind of grinding style that looks to control, and land some solid blows along the way. His clinch work's actually pretty solid as well. A bit tentative standing at times, and he's working on that aspect a little bit more, but he's going to constantly be improving, and he's young enough, and he's going to be able to get better in the striking realm as well. And he's not bad. I mean, I'm not saying he's terrible on the feet, but that's, if anything, any weakness that he's got, it's probably the striking aspect. And that's probably the best part of Eddiva's game. So he's got to be careful here. But I do find it hard to believe that Eddiva is going to be able to outperform or beat a guy like Makashvili, even though it is his UFC debut, because I think that the pressure Makashvili is going to put on him is going to kind of wear Eddiva out even more so. Eddiva does have a tendency to slow down in times in fights, and against a guy like Makashvili, you really can't have that. I mean, he's going to push such a high pace and be so aggressive and look to pin him up against the cage, look for those takedowns, look for top position. And then again, on the ground, he does have some decent ground and pound as well. So this is going to be a hard fight for Eddiva. He's going to have to keep this fight standing. He does have some decent takedown defense overall, but I don't think it's going to be as successful against a guy like Makashvili. So I'm looking forward to Makashvili's debut here. I think he's going to actually be a good addition to 145, and he's going to be able to climb the ladder slowly. And Eddiva, I kind of feel for the guy because he does have some talent. It's just the way he's been matched up thus far, it hasn't been the greatest for him, so especially with that fight. But I think the UFC probably will keep Eddiva around, even win or lose this fight, and give him maybe one more shot. But I do think he's going to probably lose this one. Makashvili is legit, and I expect good things, even better than what we've seen on footage before he enters his UFC debut. So my official pick is Makashvili to win.
Eddiva surprised me in both of his first two UFC fights. I mean, I didn't even think that he would beat Turshin, and he dominated him, had some nice takedowns, outpaced him in the striking. And then what really impressed me was actually his loss in his second UFC fight against Kevin Souza, because Kevin Souza is a really talented fighter, very dangerous and long and lanky featherweight. And Eddiva went toe-to-toe with him. That was a back-and-forth war on the feet, and they were trading bombs. And eventually, Eddiva did get overwhelmed a little bit there and did get a standing TKO, but even regardless, the fact that he was able to hold his own against Kevin Souza and land some really heavy shots against him impressed the hell out of me. So I think that against Makashvili, he might be trying to do the same thing. Makashvili does have a tendency to be inactive on the feet, even though he is a terrific striker. So if somebody really pushes the pace against him, they might be able to outwork him. So that is a threat here with Eddiva, but the fallback, as Nick mentioned, with Makashvili being, a Georgian national champ wrestler, is if Eddiva is too wild and crazy on the feet, then Makashvili could definitely shoot in on him, take him down. I could definitely see Makashvili getting top control, and I definitely feel that he does have the better ground game of the two. Eddiva is a dangerous striker, but he's not the most powerful, and I don't think Makashvili will be too worried about the pressure he'll put on. And overall, I do think Makashvili is the more talented striker, but Eddiva might be the more aggressive one. So we'll see how this fight plays out, but I think Makashvili is an extremely good talent in the featherweight division, and I think he's going to make a really impressive UFC debut. If you remember, he was supposed to face Nick Lentz on short notice earlier this year, but Lentz got sick. So Makashvili is actually getting a full training camp this time around, and I do think that he's going to go out there, he's going to mix it up, he's going to have a more diverse attack than Eddiva, and I expect that he'll be able to counter Eddiva nicely if Eddiva is too aggressive. So my pick is Makashvili. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Philippe Nover, who is 6-3, taking on Chul Nam, the Korean bulldozer, who is 18-4-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Nam minus 190, the comeback on Nover plus 150, and it's another line that really hasn't moved too much. Right now, it's actually Nam minus 175, the comeback on Nover plus 155. So again, margins kind of tighten up a little bit. Not a ton of action coming in. This should be a good fight. I'm glad Nover's getting his shot back in the UFC. This time it's going to be at 145. Nover's a very talented, underrated fighter. I mean, outside of the UFC, he's had some solid success overall. I mean, he's fought in some organizations such as Bellator. I'll tell you what, one guy right now that's in Bellator having a lot of success is Marcin Held, and he was very competitive with Held. And a lot of people that follow the sport closely know exactly what I'm talking about with Held. So that's impressive for a guy like Nover especially. And also, I mean, he's got a close fight against Martin, and both those were losses. I'm pointing those out because that shows you, I mean, at that level, I mean, he can compete with some very talented fighters. Now, the rest of the guys on his resume, he's kind of outside of those. He's beaten, and he was pretty impressive in that regard as well. So Nover, I'm glad he's getting the shot back in the UFC because the guy's a very talented fighter overall. His best attribute, though, to me, is his ground game. I mean, the guy has good submission skill for sure. He's got decent fight IQ, and he's more than capable to outpoint you and win decision. He doesn't have a tremendous amount of knockout power, so that's, I think, an area that he lacks. But he's again getting better, and he has improved that in that area as well with his striking, but still has a little bit of a way to go. Now, Nam, on the other hand, I'll tell you what, he's been more than impressive. Bulldozer it's a very good nickname for the guy because, man, he's an aggressive fighter. He has a lot of knockout power on the feet as well. He's got, again, overall, a well-rounded skill set. I mean, he might not be the submission threat, but at the same time, he's got decent takedown capabilities. He's got decent takedown defense overall as well. And then on the feet, he does have some serious power. So Nover's got to be careful with that. I think his win over Tokonomi was very impressive because Tokonomi is not an easy out. The one bad thing about Nam is that you could see he does have a tendency to slow down as the fight goes. But again, this is going to be a 145, so his cardio could be a little bit better, and this isn't going to be he'll have a full training camp for this fight as well. It's not going to be a short notice type of fight, and the guy is definitely a force to be reckoned with. I mean, he's got the total package. He's got some finishing ability, and he's got the wrestling ability to make things interesting as well and make life kind of hard for Nover here. But I'm expecting a very competitive fight because Nover's going to be game. He's going to be, anxious to prove that he belongs back in the UFC. So it's going to be one of those fights that if it's the scorecards, which I'm expecting it probably does hit the scorecards, it's going to be a really close one. I am leaning towards Nam, though. I think that he has a little bit more upside to him. Even though Nover's a couple years younger, I still think that Nam can make maybe a little bit more noise in the 145 division, and just the way his skill set lines up, he's the more powerful. He's I guess the funner fighter to watch out of the two. Not taking anything away from Nover, but this will be a close fight. And again, another situation where it could be dog or pass, because it's hard to lay that kind of juice over Nover, especially with the amount of progress that he's made through the years, honestly. So I favor Nam, not a huge amount, but I do slightly lean towards him because I think he's just got more capabilities, and I think he's going to have the potential to go farther. So my official pick is going to be Nam.
Nam had a stellar UFC debut, especially that opening round against Tokudome. He dropped him 5 times when I was rewatching the fight. I mean, that is ridiculous. So the guy has a ton of power, and he's very aggressive on the feet. But Nover's an experienced striker. He should be able to hang with him, and he's not going to stand there and leave his chin right up in the middle like Tokudome did. So I expect in this fight that Nover's going to be competitive on the feet, and what's really going to happen is, and what this fight's going to boil down to, is who's going to be able to control this fight when it goes to the ground. Because Nam does have some good wrestling, but Nover has some excellent wrestling as well, and he's a very, very dangerous ground fighter. So I think that if Nam isn't able to get anything going on the feet early, and he is a wildly aggressive fighter, so it's possible that he's going to. But if he can't, then Nover's going to start to take over, because, as Nick mentioned, Nover's actually looked really good in his fights outside the UFC. He wasn't just competitive in that fight against Marcin Held. I thought he won it relatively convincingly and just got robbed. So, this is a guy that has gone in there against some of the best lightweights outside the UFC, been competitive, and should have got some wins over him. And Nover looks like he's really started to turn it around. Now, he did have a bit of a hiatus. He didn't fight in all of 2014, but he did come back this past January, dropped down to featherweight, and completely dominated his opponent. So I do think that he's going to come in here. He's made the cut to 145 before already, so he's ready for it. And with Chul Nam, he is going to be a pretty big, muscular featherweight as well. So I definitely think we should pay attention to the weigh-ins for this fight, just because you want to see how both guys look, especially Nam, because he is a little bit older. And I do think that Philippe Nover actually is going to be able to dictate the pace. This isn't the same Nover that lost 3 in a row and got cut from the UFC after being told that he was the next Anderson Silva or GSP by Dana White. So I do think that Nover's going to be back and probably the best we've ever seen him. And I actually think Philippe Nover will win this fight. So I'm going to pick Nover to pull out the win. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Hyun Lim, who is 13-4-1, taking on Neil Magny, who is 14-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Lim minus 150, the comeback on Magny plus 110, and right now at the time of the recording, it is Magny as a slight favorite, minus 120, the comeback on Lim is even money, so more action, more support coming in on Magny early on, and across the board it looks like the line is about $1.20, $1.25, pretty much all the sports books out there for Magny, so people believe in Magny, and I don't blame them. I mean, if you look at what Magny has done recently, I mean, his streak is incredible, and he's fought decent competition along the way. No doubt about that. So the guy keeps on improving. He's a very smart fighter, comes from a good camp. He's got the tool set and the skills. He's such a well-rounded fighter. I mean, he's got the striking ability. He can beat you on the feet. He's got the wrestling ability. He can take you down and beat you on the ground as well and kind of grind you out. So Magny's pretty solid, and he's a very tough out. I just think for him, it is a tough matchup with Lim. I mean, you could say a lot of the same things I just did about Magny. I think Lim's defense on the feet is a little bit worse. His footwork's not as good as Magny's, but power-wise, I mean, Lim is a beast. The guy has 10 knockouts for a reason, and most of those finishes are early as well. So power for power, I think Lim definitely has the advantage. I think if it stays on the feet, Magny might be a little bit quicker. He might be a little bit more of the technical striker of the two, but I still think the power edge goes to Lim. The finishing ability goes to Lim on the feet as well. And I don't think Magny's going to be able to bully Lim as far as getting the takedowns, controlling him on the ground as well. I think Lim's takedown defense is going to come into play here, and he's going to probably be able to keep the fight upright. And if it stays upright, the longer it stays upright, he's going to have his chances to end the fight. Now, if this was a 5-round fight, it'd be a little bit different. I would lean towards Magny a little bit more because Lim does have a tendency to slow down, and Magny definitely has a cardio advantage here. But in a 3-round fight, I do think even if it's a scorecards, Lim is going to hang in there enough that he could win a decision. I think that Lim, again, can probably, if there's going to be a finish out of the two, it's going to be Lim finishing Magny. Now, my concern with Lim is that his strike defense is not the greatest. He does get tagged. And Magny has enough power that could come into play as well. But however, I do think that, more times than not, Lim should survive Magny's output even on the feet. If he does get rocked, Lim manages to hang in there and still, finish the fight or at least go the distance. So I do think it's a very tough matchup. It's a very close matchup. But I am slightly leaning towards Lim. I think Magny's incredible streak is probably going to come to an end here.
And to me, this fight is one of the toughest ones to call on the entire card. You've got Neil Magny on one side, who is one of the most improved fighters in the entire UFC roster since making his debut in the promotion. And then you have Hyun Lim, who is one of the most dangerous welterweights on the roster in terms of pure punching power and finishing ability. So Magny does have that big advantage against most people with that massive reach over 80 inches, which is just ridiculous. And Hyun Lim actually has a really long reach as well, so Magny won't have that much more of a reach than Lim. And I don't know how he's going to respond to that. That might actually make him a little more tentative. Magny has developed a good jab, but Lim has that ability to get inside and land big power punches. And if Magny tries to take this fight to the ground, which he has done when he faces heavy hitters in the past, then Lim can counter with those just brutal knees that he throws. He has some of the best knees that he can connect with in the entire welterweight division. Just absolutely disgusting when they connect because he can finish fights at any moment with them. So Magny's going to have to be very careful in this fight because he does not have the greatest chin, and if Lim is able to connect with something really solid, he could definitely put him out. But Lim doesn't have the greatest cardio. Even though he went 5 rounds with Tarek Saffiedine, he basically took the middle 3 rounds off after a strong start. So he can come off to a really good start in that first round, and then Magny could take over. Magny is a cardio machine training out of Colorado, and he could definitely wear Lim down if he puts on a lot of pressure, but I don't know. I can see Magny staying back a little more, trying to play it safe in this fight, trying to avoid Hyun Lim's power. And I think Lim could take advantage of it here. So I'm going to pick Lim. I'm not crazy confident in it, but I do think that he has that ability, and he could definitely either knock Magny out or win a decision by at least winning 2 out of 3 rounds just with that pressure and the threat of the knockout. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, we don't have a ton of data to work with for Lim. He does have several fights here in the UFC, but several of them ended very quickly, as you said, with his knockdown, his early knockdown. So, while his knockdown rate looks very, very high, he's dropped 4 opponents 4 times at a very high rate. The bulk of his minutes were spent getting picked apart by Tarek Saffiedine. And Lim showed in that fight very bad defense. He ate a lot of shots. He's been dropped 3 times himself. So the numbers are a little chaotic here. And it's hard to draw a firm conclusion which Lim are we really going to see when he does face someone who is higher quality and able to maintain themselves. Magny should be one of those guys. Now, it's important to note these 2 guys have the longest reach in the welterweight division actually ever. So both guys are used to being able to rely on their reach. And this is a fight where neither of them will be able to do that. So we're going to see this evening out when they go toe-to-toe. And ultimately, Magny overall has been outworking opponents at a higher pace. He shows more crisp defense. I mean, he's just not getting hit as often as Lim was, at least in the aggregate of his minutes. So obviously there's a lot of caveats here because of the sample size for Lim that's muddying the waters, but Magny has logged a lot of minutes, nearly 100 minutes, 6 wins, his decisions are unanimous decisions. They may seem like close fights, but he is winning round to round, and they're not split decisions. So his efficiency is much, much higher. And he appears to be more well-rounded in utilizing his wrestling. So, he actually uses the wrestling. He has been getting the better of people. And Lim just hasn't used it offensively. He has good takedown defense, but he's just not really showing any offense there. So there's a lot of back and forth on this page. I would lean Magny slightly, just because I can, prove it more on paper that he can be a high output 3 full rounds. He trains at altitude at Grudge. He's probably not going to get tired, and he's a big frame, so he can actually handle Lim, whereas Lim may have gotten by with his long range attack. Certainly Lim has power. That is definitely a threat. But in terms of overall efficiency, I'm leaning slightly Magny here, but it's not confident. And I think overall, I think this goes to a decision. And it could be a close one, but I think Magny maybe slightly edges out on after 3 rounds.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this takes us to the middleweight division, where we have Mark Munoz, who is 13-6, taking on Luke Barnatt, who is 8-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I'll put Barnatt -125, the comeback on Munoz -115, and right now it's Barnatt -160 plus 140. So more support coming in on Barnatt in this spot. Man, it's always tough. I can understand why people are coming in and betting Barnatt over Munoz. And I'm saying it's always tough because we just don't know what Munoz is going to show up at this point of his career. I mean, he's 37 years old. It's rumored to be his last fight, of course. I mean, he just sold his gym. And in his last couple performances, he's looked pretty bad. I mean, Mousasi and Carnero just destroyed him early, and that's not typically what you see out of Mark Munoz. I mean, if you look back at his fight, I mean, the Machida head kick loss is, of course, I think it's kind of respectable because Machida could do that to a lot of people as well. But if you look back, I mean, his performance against Bosch was surprising. A lot of people counted him out at that point, and he showed up, and he decided to, be the Munoz that we're all used to seeing with his takedowns, with his relentless ground and pound, and he just manhandled Bosch, and he won an easy decision there. So if that Munoz shows up, he can win the fight, but we haven't really seen that Munoz show up consistently. So I think that's what people are fading more Munoz than anything else in this spot. Barnatt, he's got a lot of question marks surrounding him as well. I think he's a very talented fighter. In fact, his last 2 decision losses have been split decisions, and you can argue that he won both of those decisions, no doubt about it. So he could very easily be undefeated still, officially in the UFC. So that being said, he does have some holes in his game as well. His strike defense is horrible. His chin is a little bit suspect. I mean, he hasn't been knocked out officially yet in his UFC career, but at the same time, he gets dropped. He's been dropped several times, and he could definitely get controlled on the ground once on top. And Munoz is that kind of wrestler that he could do some damage for sure if he's on top and he gets that position. But I think Barnett's takedown defense overall is pretty solid. Munoz was probably going to struggle getting him to the ground. And if he does, Barnett's going to honestly have a decent striking advantage over Munoz. He's going to have the long reach to go along with some power. And like I said earlier, I mean, Munoz at this stage of his career, I'm not sure what he's got left in the tank. His chin has always been a little bit suspect, and Barnatt has enough power to definitely finish Munoz. So it's hard not to pick Barnatt in this spot. It's almost more of a case of fading Munoz than anything else. So I am going to pick Barnatt. I think he's going to come away with a win here as well.
Yeah, this is more of a fade of the recent Mark Munoz than it is a pick of Barnatt. Mark Munoz has not looked good at all in any of his last 3 fights. Granted, 2 of those were against Gegard, Mousasi, and Lionel Machida, but that last fight against Rowan Carnero, I mean, Mark Munoz was a national champion wrestler, and he got dominated on the ground by this guy. He got taken down, and then he just got completely controlled, and then just gave up a rear naked choke very quickly. It just doesn't look like he has that will to fight anymore. And at 37 years old, people just run out of gas in their tank at some point, and sometimes they just stop being really good fighters. And I don't know, we might be seeing that with Mark Munoz. Granted, this is his retirement fight. He might be crazy motivated to go out there and make one big last show. Especially, he's the Filipino wrecking machine. This is the UFC's debut in the Philippines. So maybe he wants to go out in style and get a win. And I don't know if he's going to be able to do it. At 37 years old, I mean, how much more motivated can he be? So we'll see what happens. Luke Barnatt on the feet should have a big advantage. He's got a decent reach advantage over Munoz, I believe. And he definitely is the better overall, more well-versed striker. Munoz was working on that, but I mean, he's a guy that got rocked by Damian Maia on the feet. So, he's not exactly a world beater in the stand-up department. If Barnatt's able to get anything going on the feet, he's probably going to be able to knock him out. Munoz needs to take this fight to the ground and get on top because for some reason, I mean, if he becomes defensive on the ground, if he gets put on his back at all, he just completely wilts, and it has not looked pretty. Like, we need to get that same Mark Munoz back that destroyed Chris Levan, just slaughtered Tim Boetsch. Not anything like the fighter that we saw in his last 3 fights. So we'll see what happens, but it's not a good sign when he's selling his gym before he even has his last fight. He's having to bounce around other gyms. So I don't know what we're going to see with Mark Munoz, but I don't really trust it. Even if he is crazy motivated, it just might not be enough. So I'm going to pick Luke Barnatt. I'm not crazy confident just because who knows what could happen here with Munoz making the debut in the Philippines, but I'm picking Barnatt anyways because I'm sure that he's very frustrated after 2 tough losses that he probably almost certainly should have won if he hadn't made a couple mental lapses. So I'm picking Barnatt. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I broke this one down in more detail on MMA Oddsbreaker, but to sum up, I'm in agreement here. I mean, Barnatt is the younger, much longer, rangier guy. He should be durable, even though maybe he's not really a highly technical guy. He just somehow gets it done. He's a high-paced striker. He can go 3 rounds and keep pouring it on. He seems to be pretty tough and resilient. And Mark Munoz, on the other hand, he was a wrestler first. His striking has been okay, just never great. It's also really almost an afterthought. I mean, he doesn't really establish it unless he gets lucky early. So while he has mild power, his chin is much more of a liability. So if he goes toe to toe, you can't really bank on him landing something before he gets clipped and dropped. He's been dropped 5 times. He has the lowest knockdown rate or chin defense rating on the entire main card. And in terms of pace alone, not only is he the slowest paced fighter standing up and striking, he has less than half the output that Barnatt averages. So Barnatt is going to be bigger, longer, faster, younger, more durable. He doesn't have to be highly technical to get into a striking fest with Munoz and win. That said, Barnatt isn't much of a wrestler, hasn't used it a lot. And Munoz, that is his specialty, if he can get it there. And it seems like people have cracked that code. Munoz shoots for most of his takedowns, and his success rate is very, very low. So unless he sets it up with striking, he doesn't have a lot of success actually getting the fight to the ground. And in order to do that, he has to get into a little bit of a fist fight. And he probably can't survive at this point against someone with all those numbers stacked with them. So I'm going with Barnatt. There is the risk that Munoz does get close and grinds out an early round, maybe lies on top of Barnatt, tries to grind him down. You never know. And therefore I wouldn't want to pay too much for Barnatt, but he certainly does have the right advantages here to get past Munoz.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this takes us to the co-main event of the evening, also in the middleweight division. We have Gegard Mousasi, who is 36-5-2, taking on Costa's Philippou, who is 13-4 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Mousasi minus 555, the comeback on Philippou plus 365, and line is staying steady. Right now it's minus 550 plus 425. Line margins tightened up a little bit, and there is some two-way action coming in on this fight. Wouldn't be surprised to see Mousasi climb back up a little bit with parlay action as we get closer to fight day, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to be tempted to throw him in there. Stylistically, this is just a tough fight for Philippou. I mean, Mousasi, in my opinion, is just the better fighter in almost every category. I think Mousasi can look for takedowns here, even though he's known for his striking. Mousasi's wrestling over the years has improved drastically. I think he can look for takedowns here, be successful getting Philippou on the ground. Philippou's takedown defense overall is not bad, but I still think the way Mousasi goes about getting the fight to the floor, he's going to have some success doing that, even against Philippou's solid takedown defense. Now, that being said, the submission edge definitely goes to Mousasi on the ground once he has it there. I think he can definitely sub Philippou if it's there. He can at least grind him out if Philippou does survive on the ground with him. On the feet, if it stays standing, I think Mousasi's a little bit more versed in his attack. I think he can mix things up a little bit better, and he could do a little bit more damage. I think Philippou's best shot is making this just a stand-up war and just landing with power and just rocking and dropping Mousasi. But Mousasi hasn't been knocked out in his whole career. Philippou is the older fighter of the two. It doesn't look good for him. Like I said, I think Philippou's best shot is just kind of a puncher's chance and getting lucky and kind of rocking Mousasi, and I just don't see that happening either. So I have a lot of respect for Philippou. I think he's a great fighter, and especially in his last performance, that was very impressive because he fought a very game Larkin, which is also a tremendous striker, and that was a war. That was one of the best fights I've seen in a long time, honestly. They were going back and forth, hurting each other. Philippou showed his heart there, showed what he's capable of when the guy wants it, and he did look better. He went through a little rut there. The couple fights before that, you could tell Philippou took things a lot more serious, went into camp, of course, and improved on a lot of things and had that hunger and desire to win that fight. And that's what got him through here. So Philippou is probably going to be the best version that we've seen. He knows what he's facing against a guy like Mousasi. So he's going to be dangerous. No question about it. But that being said, I still don't see how he beats Mousasi. Like I said, minus landing that, kind of lucky puncher's type of chance. So if he does that, maybe we could see a big upset, but other than that, I do think that Mousasi is a side here. I think he's going to probably get this fight at one point or another to the ground and probably finish Philippou there. If not, Mousasi should win decision. So it's Mousasi's fight to win or lose, and I think he's going to win it.
Philippou is coming off of an impressive win over Lorenz Larkin, but that still doesn't make me think that he can beat Gegard Mousasi. Mousasi is just so much more diverse than Philippou. Philippou basically still, even after all the extra training and working on his kickboxing, he's still primarily a boxer. He'll move forward. He's been working on the takedown defense. He added a little bit of leg kicks to his game in his last fight against Lorenz Larkin, but primarily he's still looking to take your head off with his punches. So against a guy like Gegard Mousasi, who is going to be so much more diverse with his attack, Mousasi has good head strikes, good body punches. He throws really good kicks, and then his ground game is fantastic, and his wrestling has actually gotten really good. So, if Mousasi wants to, I think he can take this fight to the ground with his wrestling. I think Mousasi can submit Philippou if it does go to the canvas, and I think that Mousasi could knock him out from distance if he's able to just stay back a little bit out of the pure boxing range. Philippou's biggest advantage in this fight is if he's able to keep it in the pocket and make this a firefight, or Philippou isn't bad in the clinch either. Especially if he's on the inside position, he can land some good elbows and knees. So that's basically where Philippou is most dangerous. If you look at the evolution of Philippou, he was a guy that stayed back and worked the boxing and was a bit inactive, and it wasn't really leading to many finishes or anything. It wasn't that impressive, but I think he got very motivated after those tough losses to Carmont and to Luke Rockhold, and he just went after Lorenz Larkin in his last fight. That was a completely different Costas Philippou, and if he does that against Gegard Mousasi, he could really catch the Iranian off guard. So it still probably would lead to Mousasi winning, in my opinion, but I do like this new, improved, more aggressive Philippou that's not just sitting back and looking to counter. So we'll see what happens with it, but I still think that Mousasi is the better overall fighter, and I expect Mousasi to win. So my pick is Gegard Mousasi. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they're in agreement. Gegard Mousasi comes in with a lot of advantages over Philippou in the technical metrics. And you're right, Philippou is a boxer. That's his base. He's a headhunter. The vast majority of his strikes are just going to be punches at the head. But the problem is he's facing someone who has seen a lot of that. Mousasi has all this kickboxing experience to draw from against big-time opponents, including physically big opponents. And so with the range advantage favoring Mousasi, I don't think he's going to see anything he can't handle. Philippou is certainly powerful, 5 knockdowns, very high knockdown rate, but he's also been dropped himself on much fewer strikes. So he's pushing 36 soon. That's not a good place to be, especially if you were a career boxer getting hit in the head quite a bit. So is he on the downturn? Perhaps. I have always been big on Philippou. He ran into some top level talent, which is how he lost. But I do think it was just a little too late for him to round out his game and learn the MMA side. So I think he's just a little bit out of his league in most aspects of this fight, I think. But you're right, he does have the puncher's chance, and that's why with the odds the way they are currently, these are the steepest odds on the entire card for Mousasi, and I would be hesitant to lay that kind of juice, knowing that Philippou on a good day can crack someone on the chin with the best of them. So I would be careful about that. But Mousasi does seem to have a lot of advantages here, and I would definitely pick him to win.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this brings us to the main event of the evening in the featherweight division. We have Frankie Edgar, who is 17-4-1, taking on Urijah Faber, who is 32-7. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Edgar minus 380, the comeback on Faber plus 260, and right now at 5 dimes, it's minus 400 for Edgar, plus 325 for Faber. So a slight increase on Edgar, but not much. Line margins kind of tighten up a little bit, and they are drawing two-way action. And it's a surprise in a way that that Faber is this much of an underdog. But again, look who he's facing. He's facing Edgar, which this is back at 145. And former lightweight champion Frankie Edgar, and I mean, has battled with obviously Jose Aldo. He was right there with him as well. So Edgar's faced who's who in the UFC thus far throughout his career. You could say the same thing about Faber. So this is truly a super fight. I mean, I'm glad to see it take place here. I think it's going to be fun to watch, but as far as how they match up, I mean, again, it's another situation where it's hard to believe that Faber really has an advantage in any particular category. I mean, Faber does have some great submission skill, no doubt about it. Has some underrated power on the feet, no doubt about that as well. Both these guys are getting up there a little bit in age, and again, fight years are probably beyond that because of the wars they've both went through throughout their careers. But that's going to be pretty much a wash there. They're about the same size. Edgar's going to be a little bit bigger as well. And I think talent for talent, skill set for skill set, Edgar's just going to be a step ahead. I think the wrestling is going to favor Edgar in this spot. Submission wise, it's going to be a scratch. I think Faber's a little bit more dangerous with the submissions. If he gets around anybody's neck, no doubt he can finish the fight. He's proven that time and time again. I just think as far as outpointing Faber, Edgar should have I don't want to say an easy time because I'm expecting a competitive fight, but still, I think it should be clear enough that Edgar, wherever the fight takes place, even whether it's on the feet, I think Edgar's going to be a little bit busier. He's going to be a little bit more effective overall. I think if it's on the ground, it's going to be Edgar, obviously, with his wrestling so underrated. It's so great to see, I mean, how fast he gets the takedowns, how fast he shoots in and gets people on their back and controls them. I mean, outstanding. He's one of the best, I think, that I've seen in the UFC period in any weight class, going about his takedowns and just controlling the fight and controlling the tempo and the action. So I really think that Edgar's going to have the edge there as well. So anywhere this fight takes place, Edgar should be a step ahead of him. And I think that that's why I had to open the line pretty high. I think that's why the line's staying that high as well. A lot of people recognize that it's going to be a tough fight for Faber. But I do expect it to have its moments for sure, back and forth a little bit. But overall, again, without Faber maybe landing a type of lucky punch and just dropping Edgar and, finishing him that way, I find it hard to believe that he's going to win this fight. So I think that Edgar will outpoint Faber, probably hits the scorecards, and we're going to see, Edgar winning at least 3-4 rounds of this fight. And he should cruise to a unanimous decision win. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope it's a lot more competitive so we see even, a funner fight, but I think that, that's probably the way it plays out. So Edgar is my choice, and like everyone else, I think he is going to come through with a win here.
I definitely think that this is Edgar's fight to lose. I mean, overall, he just has an advantage almost everywhere. He is going to be the quicker fighter. That's definitely not going to be something good for Faber because he needs to rely on speed and conditioning and everything else in most of his fights. And he's going to be, in my opinion, the better wrestler, even though Faber has relied on wrestling throughout most of his career. And Edgar should have a slight advantage in submissions. He's definitely worked to improve that. That late submission against Cub Swanson was very impressive. And Edgar is definitely the more active fighter. I mean, he is in and out, in your face, landing punches nonstop. He has looked as good in his last few fights as he has ever looked in his entire career. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see one of the best performances yet out of Edgar, mainly just because this is a fight that he's actually one of the first times in his career fighting somebody his own size. And he's actually going to be slightly bigger than Faber, I think, come fight time. So, Frankie Edgar just has a ton of advantages. The only real thing that Faber has is that one punch type of power, but even then, Frankie Edgar has taken way bigger punches from way bigger fighters, and I don't think that even though Edgar is getting a little bit older at 33 years old, I mean, Faber's 36. By fight day, he'll be 36. Today, he's 35, but on May 14th, he'll be 36 years old, and man, it gets tougher and tougher the longer you go, although Faber has been able to defy the odds over the last few years. But that being said, Frankie Edgar is just fighting at an absolute elite level right now. He is, in my opinion, one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, and I would not be shocked at all to see Edgar not only defeat Faber in this fight, but finish him, just because Faber has so few ways to get anything going here. I really don't feel good about Urijah Faber's chances whatsoever. I think Faber gets out-wrestled. I think Faber gets outworked on the feet. I think Faber gets out-clinched, and I think he might even get submitted. So my pick is Frankie Edgar. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I agree with some of what you guys are saying here. On paper, Edgar does have a number of advantages, and they are key advantages. It's mainly his work output. So first of all, Edgar is used to facing usually bigger opponents, and Faber will be the smallest opponent that Edgar has faced since all the way back in, I think, 2010. So it's been a while since Edgar has actually enjoyed a reach advantage or actually just been equivalently sized to his opponent. And yet his stats still look better than Faber's, despite the fact that Edgar was continuously competing against championship, either contenders or incumbents. So, Faber also a high level guy, and we have good data on both guys, but Faber has always been a little bit reserved. He's been an effective wrestler. He's gotten most of his wins by rear naked choke. But when it's coming to stand up, he really holds back and he's waiting to land that one punch. He kind of leaves that hand cocked and ready to go, hoping to catch you on the way in. But in doing so, he loses rounds. And that's always been his problem against high caliber opponents. They can steal rounds off of him. Those are guys who use combinations, guys who use high volume, Dominic Cruz, Jose Aldo. Frankie Edgar is becoming one of those types of strikers. He has become much more diverse in his striking attack, using combinations, throwing leg kicks to set up or on the way out. And I think round to round, Edgar probably runs away with it because he does have the wrestling base and he's going to be the more active and more technical striker. That said, both these guys are getting old, and the more powerful guy, punch for punch, is definitely Faber. Faber has 3 times the knockdown rate, 3 times the knockdown scored, and Edgar has been dropped on before. Now, he always rallies, but Faber is also a smart finisher. So there is some risk here. The odds are kind of steep. I do believe that Edgar does have the advantages on paper. He will probably win this fight. But there is that concern that he might get caught with something in throwing these combinations coming forward, not necessarily bringing a lot of heat. Faber is going to learn. He's going to wait to figure out the timing, and he's going to look to blast him once or twice. And if he gets it, he could actually finish Frankie Edgar, which would be amazing. It would be a monster upset. So I think it's a smaller probability, of course, but I would urge caution in laying too much on Edgar here. I think he's probably going to get thrown in a lot of parlays, but there is some risk if he gets popped on the chin, and that would be a huge payout for Faber. So I think playing this fight requires more specific angles. I think Edgar straight up, Edgar in parlays probably is the safest bet, but careful and maybe hedge with a Faber inside the distance because there is certainly potential for that as well.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 66. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday morning following the weigh-in, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker Premium member. If you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAOddsbreaker.com and you can sign up in the top right corner of our homepage. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.